Thank you all for joining us today to welcome one of the newest members of our campus, Dean Lynn Vidler. I wish you all could have met Dean Vidler in person, but for now, I'm glad technology allows me to introduce them to you virtually. Right now, we are living through some very interesting times. Many of us have been working remotely since March. School will look different this fall for both our students and our faculty and staff. And yet, in some ways, I think this is the perfect time for Dean Vidler to be joining us. Starting on day one, Lynn was already making inroads with our community and our Mountain Lion family. They started right off the bat with a month of introductory videos, introducing themselves to campus. They are a strong communicator and relationship builder with phenomenal intercultural competence. If you did not know, Lynn is actually trilingual, speaking English, Spanish, and Portuguese. They have experience in international academic affairs and study abroad programs. After spending 12 years teaching at West Point, they also bring a deep understanding of the needs of our military-affiliated students and staff. Lynn is on the board of directors of the Association of Hispanic Classical Theater, and they bring a fantastic background in equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts as well. Dean Vidler's experience includes developing policies to make the hiring process more equitable, broadening the EDI curriculum, and expanding campus activities on these topics. I'm very excited to see the innovative practices Lynn will bring to UCCS. In today's new normal, all of the skills and accomplishments that Lynn will bring to their role are critically important. Now, more than ever, we all need strong communication skills and the ability to build relationships, whether or not we're able to meet in person to do so. We all need cultural competency and an appreciation of ours and others' diverse skills, values, and abilities. These times may not feel perfect, but I do believe this is the perfect time for Dean Vidler to be joining the Mountain Lion family. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Provost Tom Christensen, who's going to make a few remarks as well.
Thank you, Chancellor. So today's town hall will be divided into 3 sections. In a few minutes, we'll hear directly from Dean Vidler. Lynn will then address some questions that were submitted ahead of time. And finally, they will take questions that you can submit during the town hall using the live chat on the YouTube page. In introducing Dr. Vidler, let me add a little more detail to what the Chancellor has already said. Their research is on drama from Spain's Golden Age, focusing on theoretical approaches to the reconstruction of early modern staging practices. Dean Vidler's book, Performance Reconstruction in Spanish Golden Age Drama, Reviving and Revising the Comedia, was called a manifesto for the field by Shakespeare Bulletin. During their time on the faculty at West Point, Lynn achieved the rank of full professor. And at the University of South Dakota, Dr. Vidler expanded their administrative experience, serving as chair of modern languages and linguistics, associate dean for administration in the College of Arts and Sciences, and faculty athletics representative. As associate dean, Dr. Vidler was responsible for supporting faculty affairs, grant-funded research, online education, scholarship stewardship, new chair development, and faculty mentorship. As we explore revisions to our budget model to move toward a more incentive-based model, their experience with a similar model in South Dakota will be very valuable. Dean Vidler also consults with the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education, where they've worked on the Interstate Passport Program, a system that supports the interstate transfer of general education credits based on learning outcomes. That's somewhat like an interstate version of the Colorado GT Pathways program. They also served the same organization as chair of the Human Cultures Goal Team. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Dean Lynn Vidler.
Thank you so much, Tom, Venkat, and to everyone who's logged in today. I really appreciate you being here. And I'm ecstatic to be here in Colorado Springs, safe and sound after a somewhat odd mid-pandemic move. And if you'll humor me for just a second, I want to take you back to mid-March and remember what we were doing mid-March, right? So spring break just happened. Everyone was suddenly working remotely, pivoting instantly to remote instruction, trying to support the faculty and staff in their remote work and in their pivot to remote instruction. And I was in South Dakota doing the same things. Also, like many of you, my family, there was a lot of impact with the family as well. Both of my kids came back to the house from their respective schools. So my son, who was a freshman at the University of South Dakota, and then my daughter, who was a last semester graduate student at the University of Hawaii in music. And so she and her fiance literally threw everything in the trash, put their clothes in a suitcase, and left. So we went from 2 people at home to 5 people at home, battling over the internet, battling over the dishes. And then I had to tell them they had to move out, that I was moving to Colorado Springs. My wife, who has been incredibly supportive, arrived in Colorado Springs completely sight unseen. We were not able to house hunt or anything like that because Colorado was shut down. And in fact, the day that we drove, we not only had to deal with the degree of shutdownness of Colorado, but also a curfew in Colorado Springs due to the Black Lives Matter protests. And so it's been a journey. I'm not sure that I've experienced the pandemic in exactly the same way as everyone else, but I'm very, very excited to be here. And since, of course, everything is virtual right now, so I've tried to communicate as much as possible and as widely as possible so that you would have a chance to get to know me, my personality, ways of thinking. And many of you have responded to those videos and those communications. So I thank you so much for everybody's warm welcome, to my staff for an incredibly warm welcome, and for the different questions and concerns that you've expressed in the past month. This town hall, however, is very important because it's really the first time that we will have a chance together to discuss some of the different challenges that we face in LAS. And of course, LAS is not only experiencing challenges due to the coronavirus. We are also in the middle of several moments of transition that we are navigating. As many of you know, we are in the process of collaborating with the other colleges and schools to align our efforts with the UCCS strategic plan. We are also transitioning, as we mentioned, to an incentive-based budget model. And we've also been granted R2 status. So in as much as we are focused in the short term on ensuring the health and safety of our staff, our faculty, and our students, there is actually a future out there. And I don't want us to lose sight of how LAS is going to drive forward to that future. So in these transitions, there are some guiding principles that I would like us to think about as a group. And the first one has to do with leadership. I view very strongly that leadership is an activity. It's not a position or a role of authority. It's something that people do in which they engage others to make progress on challenges that matter to them. And so I'm not here, I'm not riding in on a horse to save LAS, right? We need to work together to make progress on these challenges. So most of you are already contributing in this way. So if you're a faculty member on this call, you lead by bringing your research expertise to bear on global challenges, by leveraging that expertise in the classroom and by improving the college through your committee service. If you're a staff member on this call, you are also leaders when you speak up about a process or a policy that doesn't really make sense, and you make suggestions to improve it. That's leadership. If you're a student on this call, you lead when you speak up about something that's going on in the residence hall. You lead when you speak up about issues of diversity and inclusion on our campus. And you lead when you participate in undergraduate research and help to create and disseminate new knowledge. So I want us to think about leadership as an activity, and that every one of us has the ability to contribute by engaging other people to make progress on challenges that matter. So while we do that, there are a few values that I would like us to think about as we face these challenges together. One of the values that I find very important is that a university is a developmental organization. And that makes sense, right? We develop students and they graduate. But if developing students is such an important part of what we do, why don't we think about developing everybody involved in the organization? So I would like us to think about the university and the college in particular as a deliberately developmental organization, right? And that we can develop both individuals, and we can also develop teams and groups and organizations. And we could develop individuals by thinking about mentorship, by thinking about training, whether that's staff, faculty, alumni, or students. And as organizational groups, we can develop those. I know Tom just mentioned that I have worked on new chair training. That's something that's been important to me, and I hope to continue here so that we can improve the effectiveness of the teams that we work on. A second value that I really like for us to think about is the sort of paired intertwining of diversity and creativity. Of course, diversity and inclusion has been an important value and something that all campuses have struggled to improve. But it intersects with creativity in the sense that when we can recruit and retain people with diverse perspectives, ideas, and experiences, as an organization and as a team, we can be more creative, more innovative, and more effective than we were before. And so I'd like for us to think about those two things as inextricably intertwined. The third value I'd like for us to think about is integrity. When the entire organization, not just me, but everybody works with integrity, we build and boost trust among the team. And when we do that, it engages people to contribute to making progress on the challenges that we face. When we don't work with transparency and when we don't work with consistency, we can end up inadvertently with inequities across the organization. And when people perceive inequities, it lowers morale and it makes people not necessarily want to engage to help make progress on these challenges. So for me, integrity is really important that we all work in this way. And lastly, in terms of the values I'd like for us to think about, I don't want us to lose sight of our role as servants to the state of Colorado. We are here because we are here to serve the people of the state of Colorado. In as much as on a daily operational basis, we think about students and our dedication to students and what's in the best interest of our students. But we are a public institution. We receive funding from the state, we receive funding from the federal government, and we are here in order to expand the capacities of the state, and I don't want us to lose sight of that. In terms of the different transitions that we'll be experiencing over the next couple of years, I want to talk a little bit about the budget model. Tom mentioned and Venkat mentioned a transition to the incentive-based budget model, affectionately known as RCM, or responsibility-centered management. So this is going to be a bit of a cultural shift for us. It's simply a different accounting model. There are a variety of different accounting models. None is necessarily, better or worse than another. But this particular one encourages us to be innovative and creative in the ways in which we provide services and options to our students. As many of you know, the RCM model is different from the current budget model that we're on, the historical model. And then historical model essentially repeats a budget from year to year, whereas an RCM model funds colleges and schools based on the revenue that they generate from tuition. And then we, in turn, support other units on campus that do not generate their own tuition revenue, like the library or like facilities, for example, through those contributions. I'm actually really quite confident that the RCM model is going to be very positive for LAS. A lot of the things that had been soft funded in the past or funded on year-to-year basis, we'll actually be able to fund ourselves from the tuition revenue that we generate. That said, some of the ways in which we've operated in the past will need to be rethought, in the sense that we'll want to be a little bit more vigilant, more responsible, more creative and innovative in the ways in which we recruit and retain students, and the ways in which we think about our programs and possibly develop new programs. And the good news is that during this fiscal year, FY21, we'll be running both budget models simultaneously. So we'll be officially on the old model, but running the numbers of the new model alongside. So we'll be able to look at what it would look like next year, right, if we were working that model. And we'll still have the ability to make suggestions of adjustments to the model along the way. As far as the FY21 budget is concerned, certainly we have different challenges facing us this year from a financial perspective. Of course, last year, you are aware that we had some budget cuts due to a decrease in enrollment. This year, we will also face it's looking like we're actually pretty good, but not as much of a decrease in enrollment as we anticipated, but still a slight decrease in enrollment. But the biggest budget issue really is from the state appropriations, because the state itself is receiving less revenue, and therefore is able to appropriate less revenue. So that's the origin of our current fiscal challenges. But the one thing I'm pretty confident about is that it's not a permanent state, that we hope it's going to be just this 1 year, and maybe it will drag on a little bit longer than that. But we are fiercely protective of our people. And since we just essentially received more or less the numbers, I'm actually pretty confident that we'll be able to ride this out, and we will be communicating with all of the units that might be impacted before we make any final decisions. I'm about 15 minutes. So there are other things that I would like to say, but I think I'm going to stop because I know that there are many questions that you have that you would like to ask. There are some that were pre-submitted. I think we're going to start with those, and then we'll go to the live questions in the chat.
That's exactly correct, Lynn. And that is the plan for the next two parts of today. So I'll go ahead and take a look at the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we'll start with those. So I've looked them over already, and we got a fair number of them, and in some cases, multiple people asked some fairly similar questions. So I've combined some of the questions. I may paraphrase a little. Some people had kind of statements leading into their question, but I don't want to ask you leading questions. I want to hear what you really think.
Okay.
So in some cases, I will just ask the question without the statement, but you will have all of the original questions and statements. So people who did kind of issue statements in what they submitted will make sure that you have all of that material. Okay. So let's get on to the first of the questions. Well, can you speak to the importance of staff, both university staff and classified staff, to the college?
Yes. Okay. So I want to go back to my time at West Point as a civilian going into that institution. The learning curve was very steep in a lot of ways, and there are several very, very key lessons that I took from that experience. And one of the most important ones is that every single person contributes to the mission. Every single person is important. And so I don't ever view staff as somehow secondary or less important than anyone else. I think about, I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember a movie, I think it was back in the 90s, called A Day Without a Mexican. And it was sort of this hypothetical, they say Mexican, but I think they really meant undocumented immigrant, right? So what would happen in Southern California city if suddenly one day everybody woke up and all of the undocumented immigrants disappeared, right? Think about UCCS and what would happen if you showed up and all of the staff disappeared. There are more staff than faculty, right? And the work that they do is absolutely critical to what we do, right? This is very important to me. I will also always try to do everything that I can to support and respect the staff. One of the things that I did just recently was to make sure that staff were being considered in the return to work plans. So that was a communication that went out to chairs and directors. So that's, to me, staff, we can't live without the staff. That's my view on staff.
Well, that's certainly a true statement. We had several questions that addressed topics within the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So let's move on and look at a series of questions in that general area. Starting with how can we address the institutional structures of racism that exist within organizations like LAS?
Right, thank you. So you sort of hit the nail on the head. Organizations like LAS, it's not just LAS that has incorporated structures of racism, right? It's most institutions in the United States have these sorts of structures incorporated within them. So this particular issue hits me very personally and very deeply, right? As a human being, I'm Hispanic, I am Jewish, I am non-binary, I am bisexual. And at West Point, I used to also add civilian, right, because that was sort of an additional marginalization. And I think before Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, I used to call myself multiply marginalized, right? So this is something that I have spent much of my career, dedicated to combating racism. And at a university, I think that can happen in 4 main ways, right? So curriculum is one way. So at least in my case, I was teaching Spanish and Portuguese, so language and culture. So these kinds of lessons are sort of incorporated, into the curriculum. And thinking about ways in which we can encourage other faculty members to also diversify their reading lists and think about ways in which they can diversify the curriculum. I would say also, we're a developmental organization, as I said, right? So thinking about ways in which we can constantly develop everybody on campus on these issues. So that means organizing panels, bringing in speakers, hosting cultural events, educating everyone constantly all the time. Hiring and retention, mentoring is also, I would say, a third category that's critically important. We want to make sure that we are being inclusive. To be honest, I would not be here, okay, if I did not believe that UCCS would be accepting and welcoming of me. I was treated beautifully at my campus visit in every way. And those kinds of, that kind of attention to detail is critically important. Lastly, I would say the fourth category is lies in policies and procedures. And this, I think, is really, Tom, what maybe this question is addressing, is sort of the structures of racism, right? So how do we ensure that faculty members, for example, going up for tenure or promotion are evaluated fairly? And some of that has to do with policies of how committees are comprised, right? And the different expectations and criteria that are developed. These are the kinds of policies that can impact our diverse and intersectional faculty. I'll throw this one out there. Here's a challenge that I will personally work to engage others to make progress on. I only applied for jobs in states that offered statewide protections for gender identity and sexual orientation. Now, of course, 2 weeks after I got here, the Supreme Court sort of waved their magic wand, and that was great. But I was very happy to be able to go get my driver's license and put an X on that as a gender marker. But when I went to HR, I had to pick. I had a binary choice of gender within the CU HR system, right? So these are the kinds of structural policies and procedures that impact faculty and staff and students as they move through the organization. So I feel this very personally and have worked to mitigate these kinds of structural issues in the past and will continue to do so.
Good, thank you very much. Another question that goes along the same area of diversity. How do you plan on encouraging more diversity of thought and speech at UCCS?
Oh yeah, this is an important question, and was a serious topic of conversation and even state legislation in my previous state of South Dakota. So we're of course a public institution, right? We get state and federal funds, as I mentioned before. So we are committed to upholding constitutional principles, including free speech, right? In my previous state, there was some attempt to legislate political views of faculty, which ended up only sort of kind of getting through. But this I think is a concern of some people. That said, we're not actually permitted by law, right, to create a political litmus test for the hiring of faculty. That said, we can certainly promote free speech through encouraging class discussion, through inviting all manner of speakers and panels to campus, by encouraging, I think that to combat speech that we don't like is more speech, right? It's not less speech, right? That more speech is always better than less speech, no matter what kind of speech it is. So I'm not really sure how to continue with this question, except to say more speech is better than less speech. And, as part of a liberal arts education, it's a critical part of what we're actually teaching is the ability to read, listen, and comprehend, right? To be able to analyze and evaluate the speech that you're comprehending, to be able to synthesize and create your own evaluation and to communicate that clearly and concisely and effectively, right? So that's a big part of what we do. So we actually need a variety of opinions and speech on our campus in order to facilitate that portion of our educational mission.
Good. We have one more question that kind of falls into the same category of equity, diversity, and inclusion. When you mention equality, are you more interested in promoting equality of opportunity or equality of outcome, and why?
Are we talking about students?
This was actually, it was part of the same question that asked about the diversity of thought and speech. So it was the same person kind of went on talking about that topic. And then within that framework, asked this question about equality, promoting equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. So it isn't specific as to what the target audience is. So I guess I'd say go ahead and answer it as you deem appropriate.
Okay. I mean, when I think about students, of course, and we're talking about a university context, I'm assuming, right? So we have admissions requirements, right? So we admit students. We certainly believe that everyone that we admit, believe that they have the ability to succeed. And we also have rigorous requirements, right? That every graduate must complete in order for them to actually graduate, right? So I'm not sure that there's a privileging of opportunity or outcome, but I think about that. This is what I'm thinking about in terms of admissions requirements. We bring people in that we think can succeed, and we do everything that we can to help them succeed. Certainly, people who have the grades and the requirements to succeed may have differing levels of experiences. For example, I'm actually like a third generation PhD, right? So, I was pretty lucky going to college. Like I knew what a bursar was, and like I knew what the registrar was, and if I didn't, I could call home and ask, right? But not every student has that benefit, right? So the kind of support that we give to different kinds of students who meet the requirements are definitely, from an intellectual standpoint, completely capable of succeeding, might need a little bit of extra support to get there. And our goal is for every student who is qualified to come in, we want them to graduate.
Good. Okay, let's move on to another topic area. There was a question, what is your position on tenure evaluation in these difficult economic times? And I think really the question there was almost more one of, is the awarding of tenure at risk in these economic times? And I guess before you answer, I will just comment as the provost, I would say, no, it is not at risk, that there have been no discussions of limiting tenure. But Lynn, if you'd like to comment a little bit on tenure and its importance to the college and the evaluation of tenure, I invite you to contribute too here.
So no, tenure is not a risk, and there have been no discussions about limiting tenure based on the current economic situation. So, one of the things that I said earlier was that I'd like us to view the university as deliberately developmental, right? And so when we hire a tenure track faculty member, our goal is to, just like our goal for students is to get them to graduate and to offer them as much support as we can, we have the same view of tenure track faculty members. We want you to get tenure, right? We want to get to that moment where we can have that mutual expression of loyalty between the faculty member and the university. It provides stability and expertise to the organization that the university values. So this is not about trying to get you to fail. This is about trying to get you to succeed. And yeah, like the provost said, there have been no discussions regarding the limiting of tenure. And I also would say that in any consideration of the budget, we are doing our absolute best to protect humans.
Yep, I agree completely with what you've said. Let's move on to the topic of undergraduate research. So yeah. How do you see the value of undergraduate research, and what types of undergraduate research opportunities should we be providing?
Okay, this is a fun question for me because undergraduate research is, and I hope there's a bunch of students out there listening to this. So undergraduate research is one type of what we call experiential learning, right? So learning through experiences or learning by doing. Right. So there are a number of different types of experiential learning on top of undergraduate research. For example, study abroad or study away, service learning, community-based learning, internships, and these kinds of what UCCS calls peak learning experiences. Right. So we know from research that not only are the learning outcomes more effective when students participate in these experiences, but their graduation rates are actually higher. They become more engaged in their education and their learning experiences when they participate in these kinds of activities. Now, as a language professor, my experience with experiential learning really started with study abroad. I've led multiple trips with cadets mainly to other countries for language and immersion experiences. And as Associate Dean of the International Intellectual Development Division at West Point, I basically oversaw all international academic affairs at the Academy. I have also had a lot of experience with service learning. So service learning pairs learners with community partners for a mutually beneficial credit-bearing learning experience. So we were leveraging the Spanish language expertise of our students to help members of the community. And undergraduate research, at UCCS, in LAS specifically, we support undergraduate research in a number of ways. So, for example, we are the host of CSURF, which is the Colorado Springs Undergraduate Research Forum, which is a consortium of four schools in the Colorado Springs area, including Colorado College, the Air Force Academy, Pikes Peak Community College, and UCCS. And it's kind of like a projects day where students showcase the undergraduate students showcase the research that they've done over the year and share. So you've created and now disseminating new knowledge that you've created. There are also summer stipends and undergraduate research awards that undergraduates in LAS can apply for. And unfortunately, CSURF was canceled this spring due to coronavirus, but we hope that will pick back up this spring.
Yeah, no, the CSURF is a wonderful event, and speaking in my faculty role, I can speak for how undergraduate students who had a chance to work in my research lab, that it really seemed to make a difference to them in their education. So it's a great thing, and it is something that LAS supports well.
It does. I think one of the things that's fun about it is that you, instead of getting assigned a topic by a faculty member, which is, sometimes a necessary exercise, right, for a particular class, you are actually answering a question that you yourself asked, right? And this is what we do as scholars, and you become much more engaged in the actual investigation and research of the question. And you end up, the second order effects of learning are really outstanding. So, and then in the end, of course, you also end up with an actual product that you can showcase for an employer and say, hey, when I was in school, I worked on this project and we found this and it had this impact on the community. And that's sort of like a real world, outcome of the exercise.
So there were several questions about the campus plans for fall regarding the pandemic, but they really are more campus level questions than college level. So I just wanted to offer that I will be sending out a series of emails in the next few weeks, starting either tomorrow or Friday, where I plan to provide what I hope will be some very practical information directed at faculty. And I think that'll answer many of the questions that arose here for you. I would also refer people to the UCCS webpage, which has a link to further information on the returning to campus. And that website will be updated soon with some additional information. This is a constantly shifting target. But I think we're so close now at the beginning of the semester that we are going to try to get out some, what I hope will be very useful information to faculty. But as a result, I think I'm going to defer those questions and move on to a couple of others before we take a look at the ones that have been coming in on the live chat feature.
Oh, super.
Let's see. Instructors are concerned about low enrollments this fall. Although, as we've been hearing, the enrollments aren't coming in quite as badly as we originally thought they might. And they're concerned how that might impact their employment. Would LAS consider allowing some low enrollment classes to run, even if they're below the normal minimum that you typically enforce?
Okay, so this is a great question. Our minimums are typically 8, as I understand it. Here's my view on this. So, and it will be, let me just say first that under RCM, things will look a little bit different than they're looking now in terms of answering this question. But my approach to this is the same, okay, regardless of the budget model. So in the first place, we want classes to run when there are students in them who need the course to graduate in a timely fashion. For example, there might be other circumstances in which we would say, yes, just go. Let's make sure that this particular class runs. So it's not a black and white 8 or 0, okay, in my mind, that there are other circumstances that apply that we would definitely consider in the dean's office when making this decision. As far as workload goes, for faculty workload, I think that one of the principles that I've always applied, and as associate dean, I was essentially responsible for workload, faculty workload, is that when a class is canceled for whatever reason, after having taken into consideration all the circumstances that we would normally consider, and a faculty's workload ends up being, a faculty member ends up being underloaded for whatever reason, oftentimes what I would do is discuss with the chair and with the faculty member if there are any sort of innovative special projects that faculty member might work on. Maybe they might, for example, go through, all of the online training badges, or maybe they might work to develop some new courses, or maybe they might work on, I don't know, something that's pressing, developing a proposal for a new certificate or a minor or whatever. That there are a number of things at the department level and also at the college level that a faculty member might help with. Maybe they're going to take on the chairship of a major university-wide committee that's going, or maybe they're going to be a diversity fellow for the campus or something. I don't know, but there are ways in which we can work that sort of a thing out so that your workload is 100%, and it just might not be in teaching for that particular term. I don't know. That's sort of how I view things.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful segue into the last question that we'll do here before going to the ones that are coming in live, because instructors are also concerned about the effort involved in teaching some of the new formats like high flex and the possibility of having to pivot to an online learning again in the mid-semester. And so there was a question that just, if a course was canceled, would you be flexible in how we define 100% load? And you've at least partly answered it, but any response kind of regarding the extra effort that a lot of people are having to put in with these new formats?
Well, so, it's not something that's part of our workload practice to value online teaching more than face-to-face teaching. So I don't know that would necessarily be something that I would think about, especially considering that we've had, the spring, that was one thing, right, to pivot instantly. But then for the fall, to have at least, some sort of warning, right, so that you would be aware. And I know that Tom, you have talked about this in previous town halls, to be thinking in your course design about what would happen if we needed to pivot back to remote instruction. So I don't really see a mechanism necessarily to, like I said, count remote instruction more than face-to-face instruction. That said, I do encourage everyone to, in LAS, we actually have a robust system of incentives, paid incentives, to go through some of the different trainings that we have to develop an online course, to work through accessibility considerations, whether those are online or face-to-face, et cetera. So I would encourage people to think about, everyone to think about, leveraging those incentives, since we actually have special funds dedicated to that I can't cut.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks very much. Now we're going to shift to some questions that have been coming into the live chat feature. And in order to manage that, I'm pleased to introduce Noelle Windesheim, who is an LAS Peak Ambassador majoring in organizational and strategic communication. Noelle?
You're muted.
That might help just a little bit. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, I want to say welcome, Dean Vidler, to UCCS. We're so happy to have you here. And I also just want to say thank you for taking the time to chat with me today on behalf of the student body, and for your participation and interaction with us and the student body, already producing 3 videos for our YouTube channel. It's amazing. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And so I do have some questions coming in from the YouTube live feed, but if it's okay with you, I'd like to start with one question of my own before I get to those.
Absolutely.
So as a representative of part of the student body and a senior, I've been here on campus for 4.5 years at UCCS. Colorado Springs is my hometown, and so I know this area as well. And so welcome to my home. So I was just wondering if you as the dean have any questions for me as a student coming into a new campus.
Yes. Yes. Well, this is kind of a two-parter, and it's something I ask a lot of people, and it's really, so I would say, what would you say is the best part of UCCS? What does UCCS do well? And if you could change anything about UCCS, what would it be?
Those are great questions. So the first thing that comes to mind on what UCCS does well is community. I believe UCCS has a wonderful community. It's a very involved community, both on campus and off campus with Colorado Springs. As you know, I work for the mail and shipping department, so I'm all around campus all the time, and I'm always running into people. People are always friendly, wanting to chat, wanting to talk. And so I think just the friendliness in the campus community is something that UCCS does amazingly well.
I have felt that virtually even.
Yeah, awesome. And so something that we can improve, now if I'm talking on behalf of the entire student body, I know they're going to say parking. But if we're talking personally me, I don't know, that's a very good question. I would have to go with, I think I'll have to stick with parking for the UCCS student body portion, but it might be different now with the pandemic since a lot are more online. There might not be as lot of students on campus, so that might be something that can be looked into looking new ways to fix that for the students.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting for me because in South Dakota, I literally lived across the street from campus. So there was no point in getting a parking permit because I was actually closer at my house, right? And so this is the first time I've actually driven to work in 6 years and needed a parking permit and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was a little bit of a sticker shock. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets very interesting when everyone comes to campus. Absolutely.
I can imagine. Yeah.
All right, so I will move on to a couple of the live questions that came in on the YouTube chat, and I will go in order when they came in. Excuse me.
Okay.
So the first one is from a current faculty member, and the question is, what steps can programs and departments take toward interdisciplinary innovation?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. This is very, very interesting to me. Some of my recent research has been on the concept of creativity and what makes people and organizations creative. And one of the things that that researchers have found is actually bringing people together from different areas of experience and different disciplines, right? For so long, 100 years or more, academia has been sort of siloed into these departments and disciplines in what we might now call traditional ways. And ways to innovate in not only in research, but also in teaching are going to depend on these cross-disciplinary collaborations. So this actually is one of the things that I think might be a little bit of a challenge as we move into RCM because of the ways in which money flows when you try to collaborate across colleges, right? Then there's a discussion of like, okay, who gets the revenue, right? But within the college, and we are fortunate enough to have a very large college, it's no problem, right? Because the revenue all just comes to the college. It doesn't go department by department. And so to me, encouraging creative ways and innovative ways of collaborating is part of expanding our offerings as a college, right? that we can think creatively about ways in which we might develop programs that would entice students to come to UCCS as opposed to Boulder. And so I'm all in favor, and I'm happy to moderate or mediate discussions if anybody has an idea. And a lot of times this happens over coffee, right? So this is actually a challenge in the virtual world, right? It's even a challenge when we're physically on campus because LAS is so scattered from different buildings and whatnot. And we're so busy that it's hard sometimes to just kind of sit down over coffee and hash out an idea on a napkin. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, some of the ways in which, campuses have done this in the past is to host like collaboration speed dating, right? Where everybody gets in a room, you bring pizza or whatever, and you sit for 5 minutes with somebody and tell them what you're working on and kind of like that. That's one way to do it. I haven't really tried to do that virtually yet. You could probably do it in breakout rooms and Zoom. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But anyway, so yes, I would encourage that. I think it's a great idea. Yes, and we'll be critical really to the future of the college for sure.
Awesome. Absolutely. I agree with all of those points. And if you ever have the Pizza Out breakout sessions, please invite me because I'll be there. All right. Now, this question is from an alumni, and it says, earlier you pointed out that UCCS serves students, but also the state. What new ways might LAS begin to serve and educate the local communities, citizens, and educate the local community, citizens from the lifelong learning perspective?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so one of the things that we're working on right now is outreach to different community organizations. And actually, it was like this very perplexing, like long string of emails back and forth between people trying to schedule meetings, right? Trying to figure out how to meet people, right? So what I'm trying to do is connect with community members, and many of those are alumni, although not everybody, so that we can begin to build those relationships and hopefully my goal would be really to develop experiential programs so that we can provide student learners to provide experience and expertise to a community partner, right? So it's like service learning in a sense, but it may or may not be credit bearing depending on how we work it out, right? But there are many community members I'm learning as I learn more and more about Colorado Springs who actually could use LAS student expertise, but don't fully understand what that looks like, right? Sometimes it's easier to say, I need an engineering major or I need a computer scientist, but they don't necessarily understand what a communications major can provide to an organization or what a history major can provide to an organization. And so that's on us to be able to articulate the skills in research, the skills in effective oral and written communication. I just learned today that the chief of police at UCCS is a communications major at UCCS.
I didn't even know that.
Super cool, right? How excellent a communicator do you need to be the chief of police, right? And so what are some of those? So it's on us as we meet all of these community partners to explain, who we have and how they might be able to leverage our student expertise. So that's something that we're definitely working on. My associate dean Alex Ilyusova has been working on this for a while, and is bringing me in, to help meet everybody. So that's what I would say to my alumni out there. And we also, hope to engage, we continue to engage alumni through our different, I forget what we're calling it, but they're essentially like faculty speaker series, which has moved into the virtual space. Although I think we normally do that in person, where we invite alumni to come and hear from one of our faculty members to find out, what's going on in the Grit Center, what's going on in West. Those have been a couple of the recent ones that we've done virtually.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dean Vidler. Well, we do have more questions, and I could honestly keep going with how many are being submitted right now, but we are out of time, unfortunately. But I will make sure that all of these questions do get submitted to you, and they will show up on our YouTube channel where everyone can watch them, LAS Peak Moments. And so I'll be working with the LAS Director of Community Relations to get these answered publicly for everyone. And so, Dean Vidler, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for everything that you're doing for the College of LAS and for coming to UCCS to come work with us. And I'm going to hand it back over to Provost Christensen.
Thank you, Noelle.
Thanks, Noelle, and thanks to everyone for participating in this LAS Town Hall. We will look forward to many more opportunities to interact with Dean Vidler in the coming years. So, Lynn, welcome to UCCS, welcome to LAS, and thank you for your participation and your answers and comments today.
Thank you to everybody. I hope to meet you all in person very soon.
Okay, this concludes our town hall.